Hello everyone and welcome to You Say We Say, where everybody gets a say. I'm your host Jesse Mayfield-Sheehan. I'm joined here by Jake Saltzman. Jake, thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's going to be a blast.
Yes, it is. All right, so the biggest thing right now in Boston sports has got to be the Boston Bruins winning the Stanley Cup for the first time since 1972. So, just before Game 6, I went down to the TD Garden to ask some of the hockey fans what they thought about some of the issues concerning the Cup. So my first question was, why did Canucks goalie Roberto Luongo show up for the home games up to that point, and why was he basically going AWOL on the road? Let's check out what they had to say.
You know, I'll tell you what, I think that when the Bruins have played here and they're in the TD Garden, I think that they play much more comfortable. I think that they're able to get in front of Luongo and rattle him early, and he gave up some goals that he normally wouldn't have given up in both of these games in Boston. Whereas at home, I think that the Bruins, number one, they weren't as comfortable, and they really weren't rattling him. In fact, actually, I think that all the games that they played in Vancouver, I think that Luongo saw an awful lot of the puck and not as much of the Bruins as far as screening goes.
I'm telling you, it's the love he feels from the support of his team.
Probably, again, just the fan support. I mean, I know he's got a lot of doubters around the league because he's never won that big thing or whatever, but I mean, I hate to say it, but he is a talented guy. So, I mean, it's probably just the fans again, just getting behind him.
You know, it's hard to say. It probably has a lot to do with, you know, just the atmosphere, and he's got the home crowd supporting him, and probably his routines are a little more set in stone, whereas against, you know, like when he's in a different city, he's kind of got to go on the fly and just try and follow through as much as he can with his routines, but, you know, it's just not possible to be the same way.
Roberto Luongo was a big part of the fact that the home team won every single one of those games. You know, he gave up 16 goals in the three games in Boston. He gave up 2 goals, I believe it was, in the 3 games in Vancouver. Why do you think he was so on at home but so off away?
For me, it's a big comfort level thing for Roberto. You know, he's been a great goalie throughout his career, but look at the places he had played in his NHL career from Florida. You know, the fan base in Florida, there's really not a distinct home ice advantage in Florida when you're struggling to sell seats in your own building. So he gets to Vancouver, and all of a sudden for Luongo, there's this great home ice advantage. And he really relishes in that, and he has throughout his time in Vancouver. He did in the Olympics when the Canadians won last year, the gold medal over the USA. And so there's a big comfort level at home in Vancouver in that building, Rogers Arena for Luongo. I think that was a big part of it. And in Boston, you're not going to be treated too nicely, especially by Bruins fans. And I think Roberto really felt that.
Yep. Well, personally, what I think is, I think it had a lot to do with the momentum that the Bruins built up, particularly in games 3 and 4. Like when the hit on, which was built a lot around, I think the hit on Nathan Horton.
Hit on Nathan Horton.
Yes,
absolutely.
And because I think when you look at the first period of that Game 3, the Bruins were still struggling a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that 5-minute power play immediately after the hit, they were still looking just as you know, they were still looking pathetic. They couldn't score on him very well.
And I'm not sure the power play is a great way to evaluate the Bruins.
Yeah.
Not a strong team on the power play. Great penalty killing partially makes up for it, but not a great power play.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's fair. As long as they're generating chances, I like their chances in the game. As long as they're moving forward on the power play and not taking a step back.
Yeah.
And so I thought they built up some momentum there. But you're absolutely right. A lot of it has to do with comfort.
Yeah, a lot of it had, and really what I thought is they built up a lot of momentum in those games, and really once they got it rolling, they were able to put pressure on Luongo in games 3 and 4. But of course, he got back home and he was able to, you know, stop them in Game 5. But I think what it really built up to over time was some of the loss of his defenders, like Aaron Rome, due to the suspension and stuff like that. I think that was also a big thing, because I think a lot of what produces the defense in Vancouver was really the great defenders
and in
plugging
Game
up
7,
passes and
in
stuff
Game
like that.
7, the one game Vancouver lost at home, the cup clinching game for the Bruins, Alex Edler, defenseman, severely hurt himself, and that's a big part. Edler's a big minutes hog for Vancouver. He and Kevin Bieksa, probably Vancouver's top 2 defensemen, certainly in terms of minutes with Sammy Salo as well, and so that's a big part of things too. And again, once the momentum builds up and the Bruins can feed off of that, obviously Vancouver's going to have a hard time, and once the Bruins found some momentum, whether it was home as it was for the first 3 home games of the playoffs, or in Vancouver as it was in Game 7, that's when things really spiraled out of control.
Yeah, and so that was actually what was going to be my next question. what was what made the difference and what led to the Bruins being able to score on Luongo so much in that last game in Vancouver, as what was the difference maker, since they were only able to score on him twice over the course of 3 games in Vancouver, but then they were able to score on him, well, technically 3 times in that Game 7, since one was an open net.
One thing I noticed was offensive zone faceoff wins. The first goal Bergeron scored on the feed from Marchand, that comes off a faceoff win where Marchand's able to swoop around the faceoff man and take the puck and end up making the feed right in front to Bergeron. So faceoff wins in the offensive zone played a big part. Recchi had a good game on draws, not a typical centerman, but he was good, 4 for 4, I believe. Chris Kelly had a strong game taking faceoffs, especially on the penalty kill. So faceoffs played a big part. And also getting bodies to the net. Mark Recchi's made his whole career. He prided himself on getting in front and making things hard for the goaltender. He was able to do that. He was a +3 in that game on the ice for 3 of Boston's 4 goals, including the empty netter, which really clinched it. Also scored by Brad Marchand. So getting bodies to the net and faceoffs were the 2 big things that I noticed that really made a difference in midlife tough for Roberto Luongo.
Yep, and personally, I think another difference was Boston played a very physical game throughout the Stanley Cup, and that just builds up over time. And I think by the end of it, combine the injuries, whether slight or severe, and on the Vancouver Canucks, and whether they were just whether it's fatigue from the physical play of the Boston Bruins, that just adds up over time. And when it gets to that climactic Game 7, that just builds up and it slows down the defenders.
It's really remarkable from a Bruins standpoint. 3 Game 7 wins, 7-game series. It's a 2-week period of grueling, where you're taxing your body every other night. And so a 7-game series for both teams is incredibly taxing. And it really makes the Bruins run even that more remarkable. And that they had to win 3 Game 7s. And you're right, for Vancouver, who they'd only had one 7-game series up until that with Chicago, where they were heavy favorites. It's very taxing, and especially with injuries, and that's a big factor as well.
Yeah. All right, and so now for the next question that I asked the hockey fans over the TD Garden, the Game 1 of this series got the highest ratings on NBC since 2005, and it also got higher ratings than last year's NBA Finals between the Celtics and Lakers in Boston. But then in Game 2, it got the lowest viewership of a Stanley Cup game in the U.S. since 2007. So I asked them why the TV ratings were fluctuating so much. Let's see what they had to say.
I don't know. They missed a heck of a game in Game 2. I mean, all the games up in Vancouver have been edge of your seat nail biters. I mean, they've won by 1 goal each time. I don't know. Maybe people had a barbecue to go to that night. I have no idea. I don't know why. Maybe it was opening night kind of thing. People were excited about it, and they're like, well, I'll watch when it gets cup time.
I don't know. I think it has a lot to do with just the slow pace that the games have in Vancouver. There's not a lot of scoring. There's a lot less physical play, stuff like that. Other than that, I couldn't really tell you.
Well, I just think that people were so gung-ho in the first game, and after the Bruins lost the first game, I just think that the audience kind of caved in a little bit, but then the Bruins brought them back by winning the next 2 games in Boston.
Weekend games. It's simple as that. We need to do our best to try to keep these games where we're getting them on the Saturday night games.
That first game was on Wednesday, June 1st. The second game was on Saturday, June 4th.
Yeah.
So, Jake, what do you think? Why do you think the ratings were fluctuating so much?
I think fan number 4 in that interview hit the nail right on the head there. Games on Saturdays aren't going to be a big draw, especially in a time like this where you have the NBA Finals and the weather's nice. People are going to go out. It's the beginning of summer, and so that plays a big part. And these were the highest ratings in Game 1 since 2005. Well, if you look at 2005, that's the year right after the lockout. There's a big interest in hockey, especially for a young upcoming team like Carolina who won the Cup that year. So that has something to do with it as well.
Right. Well, I think they all had something interesting to say for that. I mean, obviously, it's Game 1. Everybody's going to be, gung-ho about it. I think, they were waiting until, Game 7, which, this first guy said, wait until, it gets, as he said, cup time, which I think, he means until it's going to be, going for
a clinching,
deciding game. Game 7's ratings were through the roof.
Yep, as were Game 6's.
Yep. And, I think the other guy said, slow pace in Vancouver. All the games were, Game 1, it was 1-0. You had to wait until the last seconds before scoring. If people watch that, people who aren't die-hard hockey fans are going to be like, oh, this is taking forever. I don't want to watch this. They're going to, ditch on
Right.
game 2. And then, of course, the guy who's like, that Boston brought it back and winning games 3 and 4. I also think people may have been brought back by the fact that game 2 was such a climactic overtime game. I mean, that's entertainment. That brings people back. And of course, like you said, weekend games, they play that does play into it. People want to go out. It's Saturday night, SATURDAY, whatever kind of
thing.
thing.
And it's interesting, and you talk about low-scoring hockey games. In the regular season, the Bruins were 7 games over 500. They were 17-10 in games in which the final goal tally was 4 or fewer. When the games were scored when goals were scored 4 or fewer in regular season games, the Bruins won 7 more games than they lost. In the playoffs, in the first 2 games, 2 low-scoring games, and the Bruins lose both those games. That sends a message to the audience that, you know what, Vancouver's for real. Who knows what Boston's chances are here, especially if you haven't been following the Bruins and know that they have that never-quit mentality. Once you see a team go down 2-0, that's tough, especially in the United States when that's when only one of the 2 teams is from the States. Yeah. And so that also had something to do with it, I believe.
Yeah, but you gotta think that diehard hockey fans aren't really going to know that. And in terms of the diehard hockey fans, this is Boston, where people are never going to give up. You got to when you got a baseball team that comes back from down 3-0, you can never give up on your team.